It is April 5th, 1933. You are an American citizen. You have survived the worst of the Great Depression. You watched the stock market vaporize in 1929. You watched your neighbors lose their farms. You watched the banks shutter their doors, locking people's life savings inside. But you were smart. You didn't trust the paper promises of the banks. You converted your savings into the only thing that has never gone to zero: gold. The ultimate insurance policy against chaos. You are holding your future in your hands, and then you hear the news on the radio. Your president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, has just signed a piece of paper, Executive Order 61002. It declares that the gold in your hand is no longer yours. You have 25 days to turn it into the government. And if you don't, the penalty is a $10,000 fine and 10 years in prison. That is not a typo. In 1933, the U.S. government threatened to lock you in a cage for a decade for the crime of trying to preserve your wealth. We are taught that the government protects private property. This is the story of the day they proved that is a lie. This is the story of the greatest armed robbery in American history, perpetrated not by gangsters, but by the President of the United States. To understand why the government turned on its own people, you have to understand the panic of 1933, the system established by the Federal Reserve just 20 years prior. The system designed by those bankers on Jekyll Island was collapsing. The banks had lent out more money than they had. They were insolvent. When people realized this, they rushed to withdraw their deposits. But they didn't want paper currency. They wanted what that paper represented. They wanted gold. Under the law at the time, you could walk into a bank with a $20 bill and demand a $20 gold coin. It was your right. But the banks didn't have the gold. The Federal Reserve didn't have the gold. The Ponzi scheme was exposed. By March 1933, the banking system was days away from total annihilation. The gold was bleeding out of the system and into private safes, mattresses, and holes in the ground. The people were voting with their money, and they were voting against the government. But there was a deeper economic reason for the panic. Deflation. Prices were crashing. If you owed money on a farm or a house, the debt stayed the same, but the money you earned to pay it was harder to get. The entire country was suffocating under debt. The government had two choices. Choice A: let the system clear. Let the bad banks fail. Let the prices fall until they hit reality. This would be painful, but honest. Choice B: print money. Inflate the currency to make the debts easier to pay. They chose choice B, but there was a problem. The gold standard. You see, for every dollar the Federal Reserve printed, they were required by law to hold 40 cents worth of gold. This was the handcuff that prevented hyperinflation. As long as citizens could redeem paper for gold, the government couldn't print unlimited money. If they printed too much, people would sense the weakness, run to the bank, and drain the gold reserves. So, to save the banks and print the money for the New Deal, FDR had to break the handcuffs. He had to take the gold. Enter FDR. He was inaugurated on March 4th. His first act was to declare a national bank holiday. Holiday. It sounds nice, doesn't it? It wasn't a holiday. It was a lockdown. He froze the entire financial system to stop the bleeding. But he knew that when the banks reopened, the run would continue. He needed to force the people back into the paper money system. He couldn't pass a law through Congress fast enough. There would be debate. There would be resistance. So, he used a weapon that bypasses democracy entirely: the executive order. On April 5th, using powers from a forgotten World War I-era statute called the Trading with the Enemy Act, FDR declared war on American savers. The order required all persons to deliver on or before May 1st, 1933, all gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates now owned by them to a Federal Reserve Bank. Think about the psychology of this. The government was telling you that the very thing you bought to protect yourself from government incompetence was now illegal. They demanded you hand over real wealth in exchange for paper currency, the very currency that was currently failing. They explicitly exempted customary use in industry, and gold coins having a recognized special value to collectors. This created a loophole for the wealthy who could classify their holdings as rare coins. While the average citizen with standard coins was stripped bare, they deployed Secret Service agents to track down large holders of gold. They encouraged citizens to inform on their neighbors. Safe deposit boxes were sealed. Millions of Americans, terrified of prison, complied. They lined up at the Fed and handed over their birthright. They exchanged sound money for fiat currency. But many did not, An estimated hundreds of millions of dollars in gold went underground. It became the ultimate contraband. People buried it in coffee cans. They hid it in plumbing. They moved it to Switzerland. But the government wasn't done. Taking the physical gold was just step one. Step two was nullifying the contracts. In 1933, almost every major contract, mortgages, government bonds, business deals, contained a gold clause. This clause stated that the debt must be paid in gold coin, or in dollars measured by the weight of gold. It was a protection against inflation. It meant that if the government devalued the dollar, the lender would still get the same amount of value back. FDR convinced Congress to pass a joint resolution canceling these clauses. He effectively rewrote every private contract in America. If you lent someone money expecting gold back, the government said, "Too bad. You have to accept paper." This led to a Supreme Court battle that almost destroyed the New Deal. In the famous Gold Clause cases of 1935, citizens sued the government. They argued that the government had broken its promise and stolen their property. The Supreme Court ruled 5-4. By a single vote, they upheld the government's actions. But even the judges who voted for it admitted it was immoral. Justice James McReynolds, in his dissent, slammed his fist on the desk and famously declared, "The Constitution is gone." With the legal battles won and the physical gold in their vaults, the government executed the final turn. When they forced you to turn in your gold in April 1933, they paid you the official price, $20.67 per ounce. Remember that number. Once the government had confiscated the vast majority of the nation's private gold supply, FDR made his next move. In January 1934, he officially devalued the dollar. He raised the statutory price of gold from $20.67 to $35 an ounce. Do the math. Overnight, the government increased the value of its new gold hoard by nearly 70%, and simultaneously, they devalued every paper dollar in your pocket by nearly 40%. It was a wealth transfer of colossal proportions. They robbed the prudent savers who held gold and transferred that wealth to the indebted government and the insolvent banks. The profit from this revaluation, billions of dollars, was placed in a slush fund called the Exchange Stabilization Fund, a fund that operates in secrecy to this day, used to manipulate currency markets without congressional oversight. If a private corporation did this, forced you to sell your assets at a low price at gunpoint, and then immediately marked up the value, the CEO would be in prison for racketeering. When the government does it, it's called monetary policy. This sounds like ancient history, doesn't it? We don't use gold coins anymore. Why should you care? You should care because the precedent was set. In 1933, the U.S. government established that in a time of crisis, it claims ownership over your assets. It established that your property rights are conditional. The ban on owning gold lasted for 41 years. It wasn't until 1974 that Americans were legally allowed to own monetary gold again. By then, the culture of saving in real assets had been destroyed. We had been trained to save in paper. Today, you don't have gold buried in the yard. You have digits on a screen. You have 401 kikes. You have crypto. In 1933, they had to physically collect heavy metal coins. It was difficult. It required agents and threats. Tomorrow, they won't need agents. When the next financial crisis hits, and it will, because the debt system created on Jekyll Island is nearing its end, they won't ask you to turn in your gold. They will simply flip a switch. They are building the infrastructure right now. Central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, programmable money that the government can track, freeze, or seize instantly. Executive Order 6102 was the analog version of what is coming. It was the warning shot. The government will always choose its own survival over your financial freedom. In 1933, the people who survived were the ones who saw the writing on the wall and acted before the hammer dropped. The question is, do you see it now? The story of the dollar's destruction didn't end in 1933. It got much worse in 1971 when the final link to gold was severed completely. That is the story of the Nixon shock, and we will cover that in the next video. Subscribe and turn on notifications. You need to know what happened then to prepare for what happens next.